Hello everybody and welcome back to Everything Created. Today's video I'm talking about soil and potting for houseplants. Last week I talked about watering, and this week I'm just going to continue on with the same topics that I'm doing on my blog. I've slowed down on the blog so that way I can catch up with my videos, and now hopefully the blog and videos should line up. I want to give everyone the opportunity to read a blog or watch a video, whatever they prefer. By the way, if you were watching last week on my watering video, I talked about this plant saying it would probably perk up after I watered it because it was really droopy like this. And I watered it and it never stood up on video, but it did about 15 minutes after I was done filming. So I just wanted to show that it's standing up now. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. On the topic of soil, you can read in my blog post. It's on everythingcreatedorg.wordpress.com. And I know it's a terribly complicated name. Eventually, I'll have my own blog website and I won't be using WordPress. The blog that I have on there is called How to Stop Murdering Your Plants. And this is part 2, soil and potting. So I'm doing a video on soil and potting as well to kind of match the blog. And then next week I'll do light. The reason that I'm doing soil and potting together instead of making them into 2 separate topics is because they're very much related when it comes to houseplant care. They're kind of hand in hand. Really, I could say the same thing about all of the topics of plant care, but that couldn't really fit into one video very well. However, I might actually put all these videos together at the end and have like a super long plant care guide for anyone who might want to watch it, and I could break it up with timestamps. Of course, there will be exceptions to the things that I'm going to say in this video because there's so much diversity in plants, just like with the last video. So if something doesn't sit right with you, this is a very general guide to give you an example of how plant care works. So for a lot of I'll just call us plant nerds. For a lot of plant nerds, one of our favorite things in the hobby is soil. That's because good, healthy soil feels good in your hands. It feels fluffy, it feels soft, it feels airy, and there's a reason that it feels good to us. It actually can alter your brain chemistry to make you happier. So there is a lot of science behind dirt feeling good, and good dirt pretty much always feels good. So I'm going to go through and talk about the different kinds of soil ingredients and the roles that they play in your potting mix. So for the most part, this video is about mixing your own soil. However, you can learn things from this video that will help you to know what soil you might want to buy. So I'll just give you a brief rundown. If you're not planning to mix your own soil and you want to purchase one at the store, if you water too much, like let's say you have a habit of watering your plants very, very often, you will want to get a chunkier soil, maybe one meant for succulents even. One that will drain very quickly and won't keep water in the soil for long term to allow your plant roots to dry and breathe between waterings. If you are a person who is terrible about remembering to water your plants, there are plenty of soil options that you can buy that they'll even say something about like holds moisture for longer or something like that. I don't necessarily recommend those in general, as they oftentimes have like polymer crystals or things in them like that will hold water a little bit too long, but they really can be helpful tools for people who really just always forget to water their plant. So anyway, I'm going to jump right in now after that. The first set of ingredients that I'm going to talk about is water retentive ingredients. So these are the ingredients that hold moisture in your soil for long periods of time. They act kind of as a base for your soil, and they will help hold plant roots in place as well. So they serve more than one purpose. Every ingredient in this list serves more than one purpose. So the first one I'm going to mention is, I have a list over here that I can look at, by the way. I have a list over here. It's coconut coir, peat moss, long fiber sphagnum moss, and vermiculite. A lot of these ingredients are really small pieces, and that makes them very suitable for being a base ingredient in your soil mix. So you might use more coconut coir or peat moss as kind of a base layer for your soil, if you will. So you would generally avoid these ingredients if you are making a soil mix for, let's say, like a succulent or something. You do not want to have a lot of these water retentive ingredients in your soil because they hold more moisture on the roots than what succulents like, and they'll often rot and die. And if they don't rot and die, you'll just have to be more careful to make sure they fully dry out in between waterings. You can really keep almost any plant in almost any kind of soil if you change your watering habits. But we talked about that last week. This week's about soil. I'm not talking about that today. The next set of ingredients I want to talk about is the ingredients that act as drainage and aeration ingredients. These ingredients are probably, I don't want to say the most important, but they're one of the most important for ensuring that your plant's roots don't rot. So plants don't drown when you overwater them. I already talked about that last week. But what happens is water sits on the roots for too long and it causes them to rot because the soil is anaerobic, which means oxygen free. So there's no air in the soil, the plant roots can't breathe, they rot and die. It's kind of like wearing wet socks. So these ingredients are generally chunky or they are inert. So like they don't absorb anything and they're usually chunky, and so they will keep air pockets in your soil and help keep the soil broken up, so that way your soil is lighter and airier, and when you water it, water can hydrate the soil and flow on through without sitting in the soil and rotting your roots. I have a lot more examples of these listed because it was easier for me to think of them for some reason. But perlite is one. It's like a puffed glass. It's the little white chunks you see in most potting soils. And then there's something called leca. It's lightweight expanded clay aggregate. I had to look at my list again. And actually, I do have some right here. Leca is these things that look like cocoa pebbles actually in the bottom of this plant. So you can also use things like orchid bark, small wood chips, sand, lump charcoal, or long fiber sphagnum moss. And if you remember, I just mentioned long fiber sphagnum moss in the moisture retentive list. That's because this kind of does both. Long fiber sphagnum moss holds on to moisture, but it also creates, because it's a big chunk of stuff, it creates air gaps in the soil and keeps the plant roots breathing. Lump charcoal is one of the things that I use. It's actually one of my favorite soil drainage and aeration ingredients. I also really like sand, so that's what I'm using later in this video. I'll show you how I mix my own soil. I use sand and charcoal as my chunky ingredients oftentimes. And sand helps to act almost like an anti-caking agent with your soil to help it stay broken up better, and it will last longer without getting compacted with sand in it. The next thing I want to talk about is nutrition ingredients. That's what I'm calling it. It probably has a fancier term out there somewhere. But these ingredients are ingredients that will slowly break down over time and add richness to your soil, add food to your soil for your plants to use as basically as a slow release fertilizer. They don't replace regular fertilization, but they add a steady, simple source of nutrition and minerals for your plant to consume as it grows. So a few of these are worm castings, mushroom compost, topsoil. If you're using topsoil, use it in moderation. It tends to cake up really bad and make your soil stick together and clump up, but you can use it, just don't use a whole lot of it if you do. Leaf litter and leaf mold both work. They'll break down slowly over time and release nutrients into the soil. These are really good for understory plants, like plants that tend to grow in the woods, or if you live in an area where you have a native plant that you're really interested in taking home. If it lives in the woods somewhere, it will do really well with leaf mold in the soil. And then again, I'm going to mention decomposing wood chips. I mentioned wood chips and orchid bark earlier. They kind of also act as nutrition because they will slowly rot over time. Mind you, it will be very, very slow, but they do provide a steady and slow source of nutrition for your plants. So I pretty much always eyeball my soil mixing, and I don't always really follow a recipe. Sometimes it looks different to me and I just do things differently, or I might even water some plants different because I know what soil ingredients I put in their soil. That may not work for everyone, but that's just how my brain works. I can remember what kind of soil each plant has and water it accordingly. That would not work for everybody, and I know for most people that probably wouldn't work, but for some reason it works for me. But I'm going to give you a couple of examples basically of what soil mix you might want to use for your plants. So let's say you are a weekly waterer, or you might water every 4 or 5 days, and you really want to water your plants very often. I would recommend you do mostly drainage/aeration ingredients. That will help your plant not hold on to too much moisture. It'll let that water drain on through, so your plant hopefully will not get root rot. Weekly watering is something that has become a huge trend among a lot of plant people. They're like, oh, you should water once a week. Really, I don't believe that you can do much of a schedule, but I talked about watering last week. This is about soil. So if you do water very often, then I would recommend you use mostly drainage/aeration ingredients. So you can use, for example, 1 part of moisture retentive ingredients. So maybe 1 part of peat moss, for example. and then 2 parts of drainage / aeration ingredients. So in my case, I would always recommend charcoal and sand, and then 1 part nutrition. So let's say 1 part mushroom compost, or maybe half a part of topsoil, or 1 part worm castings. However, if you're like me and you're a very forgetful waterer, you might want to go really heavy on the moisture retentive ingredients. So you might want to do 2 parts of peat moss or coconut coir, and then do 1 part of charcoal, and then 1 part of mushroom compost or whatever other nutrition you want to use. So like I said, I always eyeball it, and over time, if you do want to experiment with mixing your own ingredients, over time you will find that it is cheaper. I can get, for example, just using the ingredients I have outside, I got a bag of mushroom compost that was $6. I got a bag of peat moss, it's huge. It's a giant block of peat moss, and it was only $15, I think, at the time that I bought it. And I bought a bag of sand. I think it was $5, paver sand from Lowe's. And then I bought a large bag of lump charcoal for only about $15. So you add that up, that's like $45 or so for all of those ingredients, and that will make bag after bag after bag of potting soil. So you will save money in the long run. If you need a lot of plants potted up, you can save so much money by mixing your own ingredients, and that's why I do it. Now, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I do buy potting soil as like a quick and easy thing if I do run out of my mixed soil. So it's no shame, it's whatever you want to do. So right now we are going to go, and I'm going to show you how I choose to mix my own soil. There's probably other ways to do it, and you can do it however you like. But after that's done, I'm going to continue talking. I'm going to talk about potting. But first, let's go do our soil. So here's my cat under my lawnmower. So the first ingredient that I'm going to use is sphagnum peat moss, which is just, this is completely nutrient free. There's nothing in this at all except for crushed up sphagnum moss. So this holds a ton of moisture, like a lot, and it will keep your soil very wet. This is honestly a very good base for a soil. Like, a lot of your soil can be composed of this, and it can work pretty well. Next thing I'm going to use is mushroom compost. This is why I don't recommend storing your soils outside, but here I don't have anywhere else to put them, so mine are outside. But I have a worm of some kind that got in my mushroom compost. But anyways, there's also, oh my goodness, there's tons of baby isopods. Oh my goodness, there's millions of baby isopods. Well, anyway, they're beneficial anyway. But I really like mushroom compost because it feels like a good soil already. So it adds a very good base to your soil, and there's a lot of nutrition in this. So next thing I'm going to talk about is sand. This would be considered like a drainage / aeration ingredient, and this is just paver sand. You can also use like pool sand, like pool filter sand, or play sand, or whatever else you can get your hands on. And the last ingredient I'm going to use today is lumpwood charcoal that I crushed up myself, and I'll show you here in a second how I did that. But this is a really great ingredient for drainage and aeration. These large chunks will provide air pockets throughout the soil that allow roots to breathe, and also lets water run out of your soil instead of staying on the roots and rotting. So I won't spend a whole lot of time showing this, but charcoal is pretty easy to crush. And what I'm using here is mixed hardwood lump charcoal. Just make sure that it has no additives at all. So this right here, it says it has 1 ingredient, wood. So that's what you need to look for. You want to make sure there's no like lighter fluid or anything in the charcoal that you're trying to use. So I just take 2 boards, and it's kind of hard to do one-handed. I normally use both hands because I can add my body weight onto it. But I'm doing it over a TV screen, but anything would work just to catch like extra pieces that fall. I'm just gonna press down and twist, and then it's pretty well crushed up. And so any pieces that are a little bit too big, you can either break up by hand, or you can run them back through the board. I forgot to mention too, when doing this, please always either do this in a very well ventilated area, or wear a mask or something to where you're not breathing the charcoal dust, because obviously it's not good for you to breathe wood dust, so keep that in mind. Plus a little bonus, I used these mosquito dunks. They're made of some kind of base that holds a bacteria that attacks mosquito larvae, and it also works for fungus gnats. So I take one of these and I crush it up and mix it up in every batch of soil that I make. I didn't mention this on my blog, but I really like to have sand in every batch of soil that I mix, because I mentioned sand on my blog, but I didn't mention that I always like to use it. Let me clarify that. I like to stack everything up in the corners so I can kind of see how many parts of each thing I have. It's just kind of eyeballing it, honestly. It's gonna be about 1 part of charcoal, half a part of sand, and then I will do about 1 part of mushroom compost. Just add this in right here. Might as well just get dirty with it, you know? Okay, and then I'll do about 2 parts of peat moss. For those of you who may not know what I mean when I say parts, it's just a ratio thing. So it means if you have 1 cup of sand, you would have 1 cup of charcoal, and those would make 1 part of each. And so then you kind of base it off of that. Here's what we're looking at now. I've got approximately 2 parts of peat moss, half a part or so of sand, about 1 part of charcoal, and then about 1 part of mushroom compost. So we're gonna mix all this up and see how it feels. So here's what I mean when I say on the blog post that I usually prefer to eyeball it, because this has turned out pretty good. It feels really great, but it does look to me like it's a little bit too heavy on the peat moss, so I probably did just a little bit too much peat moss. So I'm gonna add back a couple handfuls of mushroom compost and a couple handfuls of sand. All right, now we're talking. So this soil looks perfect. It looks incredible. It's so fluffy and soft. The sand acts like an anti-caking agent basically to keep everything spread apart evenly so the soil won't compact down and choke out your plant's roots. It allows your plant's roots to grow faster. The peat moss will hold moisture near the roots so that way they don't ever fully dry out, unless you just never water it, of course. And then the mushroom compost will add good nutrition that's kind of like a slow release fertilizer that will keep your plant growing. So now for potting. The first thing that I want to talk about is you can kind of look at a plant and say, wow, that is way too big for that pot, or wow, that is way too small for that pot. And generally you can kind of eyeball it. But sometimes plants are really small and have a really huge root system, or maybe it's a really big plant with a really small root system. So you can't always go by that. So a good rule of thumb is to just look at the root ball of the plant, which is basically how far the roots extend out. You want your pot to be at least about 1 inch larger than that. However, when you're choosing your pot size, it's also important to, again, I mentioned watering habits several times already, but it is important to keep your watering habits in mind, because the larger your pot is, the longer it will take to dry out. So if you have a really tiny pot, and let's say it's made of clay, like a terracotta pot, it will dry out extremely fast. You'll have to water it so often, you won't even believe your eyes. So it's important to remember how you water when you choose your pot size. I tend to go for bigger pots because I am terrible at remembering to water plants. So I like a bigger pot because it holds on to moisture longer. I have a very 5 foot tall rubber tree in my room, and I rarely water it, and it does great because it holds on to so much moisture because the pot is so big. However, if you're the person, like I mentioned way earlier in the video, who just waters their plants really, really often, you might want to do like a tiny pot, maybe even a tiny clay pot. And that will help release water through the clay, and it will also drain out the bottom, and that will give you the best chance of keeping your plant alive. So these 2 pots are basically the exact opposites of each other. This has no drainage hole, which I don't recommend, by the way. Some people, if you really let your plant dry up all the way through, you can get away with this, but I don't recommend it. Take this, punch a hole in the bottom, and it would be great. But anyway, it's beside the point. This is the exact opposite of this, because this is a clay pot. It's a terracotta pot. It's been painted. I didn't do it. Someone else did. But it's been painted, and the inside of it is clay, so it was a terracotta pot. It has a drainage hole at the bottom, and this is not glazed inside here at all, so water will totally seep out of this. So this is an example of a pot that will dry up very fast. However, this pot is also it's some kind of ceramic, but no water is going to seep through this. It is going to hold water, and it has no drainage hole. So this pot would be a death sentence for most plants. My go-to is any kind of pot, whether it's plastic or ceramic or clay. Have something. I'll eventually plant something in here, but this is what they call like a cache or something, I think they call it. But anyway, this will hold water. This bottom thing will. And then this pot will have your plant in it, and it can set down in there. So if you water your plant, leave it for a little while, and then pull this out, let it drip, and then dump the extra water out of this. So that way your plant is properly watered. You can get the extra water out, and then you can just put it back in the pretty basket or whatever you have. You can use anything, glass or plastic, or even trays do the same thing basically. I really like this method. Most of my plants have a tray under them. I just find it a lot easier to just water them however much I want to, leave them for a while, and then dump out the extra water. For those of you who want to do a pot with no drainage, this is a really good setup for a lot of alocasia, colocasia, and caladiums. Those three really remind me of each other in their behavior. They're difficult to grow typically, but they do really well in this kind of setup. So this is just long fiber sphagnum moss up here, and this is leca clay down here. So that way all the excess water drains out and sits in the clay, and I can see this water level. And all I have to do is just make sure that this doesn't ever dry out all the way. And just look at these. They're doing really good. I've never been able to grow caladiums indoors, and I don't think I've ever tried. But these have been doing great and growing, and I've just been so impressed. And this poor thing, I bought it from Lowe's a while back, and this is an example of a plant that has not been taken care of very well. The soil that it's in looks like coconut coir, I'm just guessing. And it's also in a plastic pot. Plastic, obviously no water seeps out of plastic. It does have drainage holes, but there's only so much that the drainage holes can do in a pot full of moisture retaining ingredients. This plant probably had root rot at the time that I bought it. I mean, of course I got it on clearance. I really need to repot it in that soil I just made. But anyway, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is when to repot. So there's a lot of controversy on this, and again, I will say pretty much everything on the internet, it just has exceptions, and you can't lay down, well, this is just how it is for anything, because everything's different. So I've seen people say if your plants are root bound, you need to repot them right away. Well, honestly, I've seen people, and I currently have plants that are completely terribly root bound, and they're thriving. Like, they're doing fine. They look really happy. They're really healthy. They're still growing. In that case, honestly, leave it alone. Like, I wouldn't even mess with it. Sometimes I do, but most of the time you just leave it alone. Or if your plant is root bound and you feel like it would do better if you put it in a bigger pot, just get a pot that's about an inch or so larger than your root bound wad. And I'm just gonna burst your bubble here. Your grandma might have told you that you have to tear up the roots and like take a knife and like rip them apart. Otherwise they'll keep growing in a circle forever. That's not true at all. You can literally pick up your plant in its root bound wad, throw it in new soil, cover it up, and take it out 2 months later. There's going to be roots all the way out to the edge of the pot. They don't remember how to grow in a circle. They just grow in whatever direction they can get. And if there's nothing there stopping them, they'll just keep growing. So that's totally a myth. It's not true. You can totally tease the roots and kind of break them up a little bit and spread them out in your new soil. And I actually would advise that you do that, but you don't have to. And you definitely don't have to break them up with a knife, because I've seen a lot of people say that you have to like cut off half the roots every time you repot, or you have to like just terribly mangle them. That's just not true. You don't need to do it. It will be fine without that. That's it for this video. Thank you all for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And whenever you subscribe, remember to click the bell button down there so that way you get notified whenever I make new videos, so you can keep following along this series of how to keep your plants alive. I know there's so many people that struggle with keeping plants alive, and I want to help with that. I know a lot of people who have houseplants, and they ask me, what do I do when this happens? Well, my leaf's turning yellow. Why is it turning yellow? And it's dying. So that's most of the point of this series, is so I have something I can refer people to whenever they need some help. So this is only part 2 of this series. I have, I think, in total 5 parts. Give me 1 second. I'm going to check. Yeah, I have 5 parts to this series coming up. This is only part 2. And I might actually add a sixth one, pest control, which I didn't really think about whenever I was first starting this series. But I don't know if I'll add that one yet or not. I might. So we might have a 6-part series on plant care, and it will be one of the most in-depth plant care guides out there. Even though a lot of this information is very generic, it will help you learn how to care for plants across the board. As always, we'll see you next time. Stay green.